The early morning sun cast long shadows across Atlanta International Airport as Dr. Marcus Thompson walked through the terminal, his leather briefcase in one hand and a small carry-on bag in the other. At 45 years old, he carried himself with quiet confidence, wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue suit that spoke of success without shouting it. Marcus checked his watch. 6:45 a.m. His flight to Los Angeles was scheduled for 7:30 a.m., giving him plenty of time to reach his gate. As chief of neurosurgery at Atlanta Memorial Hospital, he was used to early mornings, but today was different. He was heading to California to deliver the keynote speech at the International Medical Conference, where he would present his groundbreaking research on innovative brain surgery techniques. The terminal was already bustling with travelers. Business people hurried past with coffee cups in hand, families caroled sleepy children, and airline staff moved purposefully through the crowds. Marcus made his way to the first-class check-in counter, where a friendly male attendant greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, Dr. Thompson," the attendant said, checking his reservation. "Your flight to Los Angeles is on time. Would you like to keep your seat in 2A? "Yes, thank you," Marcus replied, appreciating the professional service. He had learned early in his career that first-class travel meant better rest, which was essential given his demanding schedule. After passing through security, Marcus stopped at a cafe to grab a green tea. As he waited in line, he noticed a group of flight attendants gathering near the counter, preparing for their upcoming flights. Among them was Sarah Miller, a woman in her mid-30s with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, her navy blue uniform pristinely pressed. Sarah had been working as a flight attendant for 15 years, and she prided herself on what she called her intuition about passengers. In reality, her judgments were often based on deeply ingrained prejudices she refused to acknowledge. Marcus made his way to Gate A7, where boarding had already begun for first-class passengers. As he approached the gate, he could hear Sarah's voice. She would be working on his flight. She was speaking to another attendant, making subtle comments about maintaining standards in first class. When Marcus presented his boarding pass, Sarah's smile froze. Her eyes darted between his face and his first-class ticket several times, her expression shifting from surprise to suspicion. "Sir, are you sure you're at the correct gate?" she asked, her tone condescending. "This is the first-class boarding line." Marcus remained calm, having encountered similar situations before. "Yes, I'm in the correct line. Seat 2A, first class," he replied quietly but firmly. Sarah's lips tightened as she examined his boarding pass with exaggerated scrutiny. "I'll need to see your ID again," she demanded, despite having already checked it once. Other passengers began to notice the interaction. An elderly white couple behind Marcus exchanged uncomfortable glances, while a young woman a few feet away discreetly started recording the scene on her phone. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked, his voice steady as he presented his ID once more. No problem," Sarah replied stiffly, unable to find any reason to deny him boarding. "Please proceed to your seat." As Marcus walked down the jet bridge, he could hear Sarah muttering to her colleague about how some people must have gotten lucky with ticket upgrades. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of the importance of his upcoming speech and the hundreds of medical students who would be attending the conference. Settling into his seat, Marcus placed his briefcase carefully under the seat in front of him. He pulled out a medical journal from his bag, preparing to review his presentation one last time. The other first-class passengers began boarding, and he noticed how Sarah warmly greeted each of them, except him. A young flight attendant named Michael offered Marcus a pre-flight beverage, treating him with the respect his ticket warranted. However, Sarah kept walking past, pretending not to notice when Marcus's call button went on later. Little did Sarah know that the man she was so blatantly discriminating against was not only one of the country's top neurosurgeons, but also someone who had revolutionized several life-saving surgical procedures. The next few hours would teach her a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. The large aircraft cruised at 35,000 feet, and Sarah Miller continued her pattern of discriminatory behavior. Every time she passed by Dr. Marcus Thompson's seat, she made a point to avoid eye contact while cheerfully attending to other first-class passengers' needs. 2 hours into the flight, Sarah approached the elderly couple sitting across from Marcus with a warm smile. "Would you like to see our premium wine selection?" she asked loudly enough for Marcus to hear. When Marcus raised his hand to request the same service, Sarah promptly turned and walked away, pretending not to notice. Michael, the younger flight attendant, noticed Sarah's behavior and felt increasingly uncomfortable. During a quiet moment in the galley, he whispered to Sarah, "That gentleman in Tua hasn't been served yet. If he wants something, he can wait." Sarah replied sharply, "I'm sure he's not used to this level of service anyway." Her words dripped with prejudice, unaware that several passengers nearby could hear her comments. Meanwhile, Marcus remained composed, focusing on his presentation notes. As chief of neurosurgery, he had faced discrimination before, but never quite this blatant on a professional airline. He made a mental note to file a formal complaint later, not out of vengeance, but to prevent other passengers from experiencing similar treatment. A businesswoman sitting behind Marcus, Jennifer Chen, had been watching the situation unfold. She was the CEO of a major tech company and had experienced her own share of discrimination. She discreetly began documenting Sarah's behavior on her phone, shaking her head in disapproval. The tension in first class grew when Sarah accidentally spilled water on Marcus's briefcase while serving the passenger next to him. She offered a hasty, insincere apology, making no effort to help clean up the mess. Marcus calmly used his own napkins to dry his briefcase, which fortunately protected his important medical documents inside. "Would you like some fresh napkins, sir?" Michael stepped in quickly, trying to make up for his colleague's behavior. He had been trained better and understood that customer service should be equal for all passengers. As Sarah continued her rounds, she engaged in loud conversations with other passengers, making pointed remarks about how some people might have gotten their tickets through airline mistakes or computer errors. Each comment was clearly aimed at Marcus, though she never addressed him directly. A child from business class wandered into first class, looking lost and slightly scared. When she approached Marcus's seat, Sarah rushed forward, ready to intervene. However, she stopped short when she saw Marcus calmly help the little girl. "Are you looking for your parents?" Marcus asked kindly. The child nodded. "I went to the bathroom and got confused," the girl admitted, tears forming in her eyes. Marcus pressed his call button, and despite Sarah's presence, it was Michael who responded. Together, they helped reunite the child with her worried mother in business class. The mother thanked Marcus profusely, impressed by his gentle manner with her daughter. Returning to his seat, Marcus overheard Sarah speaking to another flight attendant. "We need to be more careful about who wanders into first class. Standards are really slipping these days." Jennifer Chen had had enough. She stood up and approached Sarah. "Excuse me," she said firmly, "I'd like to speak to the lead flight attendant about the service on this flight." Sarah's face paled slightly. "I am the lead flight attendant, ma'am." "Then we have a problem," Jennifer replied. "I've been observing your behavior toward the gentleman in 2A, and it's completely unacceptable." Sarah's defensive response was cut short by a sudden commotion several rows back. An elderly passenger was showing signs of distress, clutching his chest and having difficulty breathing. The situation was about to take an unexpected turn, and Sarah's prejudices were about to be exposed in the most dramatic way possible. As panic began to spread through the cabin, Sarah still had no idea that the passenger she had been discriminating against was exactly the kind of person they would need in this emergency. The next few minutes would change everything, and Sarah's world was about to be turned upside down. Chaos erupted in the aircraft as the elderly passenger, Mr. James Wilson, slumped in his seat, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. His wife screamed for help, attracting everyone's attention. Sarah rushed to the scene, her previous attitude momentarily forgotten in the face of an emergency. "Is there a doctor on board?" Sarah's voice cracked as she made the announcement over the intercom. Her hands trembled as she reached for the emergency medical kit, watching Mr. Wilson's condition deteriorate rapidly. Without hesitation, Marcus stood up from his seat. "I'm a doctor," he stated calmly, moving toward the alien passenger. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief, but before she could react, Marcus was already beside Mr. Wilson. "Sir, I'm Dr. Marcus Thompson, Chief of Neurosurgery at Atlanta Memorial Hospital. Can you hear me?" Marcus's professional demeanor took over as he assessed the situation. Mr. Wilson managed a weak nod, still clutching his chest. Sarah stood frozen, watching as Marcus expertly checked Mr. Wilson's vital signs. I need the emergency medical kit, he commanded, his voice firm and authoritative. Michael quickly handed it to him, while Sarah remained rooted to the spot. He's having a cardiac event, Marcus announced. How far are we from the nearest airport? He asked, directing his question to Michael, knowing Sarah was still processing the revelation of his identity. As Marcus worked to stabilize Mr. Wilson, passengers began whispering among themselves. Jennifer Chen, who had earlier confronted Sarah about her behavior, was now recording everything on her phone. The contrast between Sarah's earlier treatment of Marcus and his current life-saving actions was stark. Blood pressure is dangerously high, Marcus muttered, working efficiently. Sarah, I need you to contact ground medical services immediately. The use of her name snapped Sarah out of her daze, and she fumbled with the aircraft's communication system. Mr. Wilson's wife clutched Marcus's arm. Please save him, she pleaded. He's all I have. I'm doing everything I can, ma'am, Marcus assured her, his calm presence providing comfort to everyone around him. He administered medication from the emergency kit, his actions precise and confident. The other passengers watched in awe as Marcus transformed from the quietly dignified man Sarah had been discriminating against into a commanding medical professional fighting to save a life. Some of them had witnessed Sarah's earlier behavior, and the irony of the situation wasn't lost on them. After several tense minutes, Mr. Wilson's color began to improve, and his breathing steadied. Marcus continued monitoring him closely, explaining each step to the anxious wife in simple, understanding terms. The medication is working, Marcus explained. His condition is stabilizing, but he'll need proper medical attention as soon as we land. He turned to Michael. Please ensure there's an emergency medical team waiting at the gate. Throughout this ordeal, Sarah had retreated to the galley, her face a mixture of shame and shock. The realization that she had spent hours discriminating against a highly qualified medical professional who was now saving a passenger's life hit her hard. Jennifer Chen approached Sarah in the galley. I hope you understand now why assumptions and prejudices can be so dangerous, she said quietly. That man you've been treating so poorly just saved someone's life. Word about the incident spread throughout the aircraft. Passengers from business class who had witnessed Marcus helping the lost child earlier now learned he was a renowned surgeon. The story of Sarah's behavior and Marcus's professionalism was already being shared on social media through various passengers' accounts. As Mr. Wilson's condition continued to improve under Marcus's care, Sarah was forced to face the consequences of her actions. Every time she passed by to check on the situation, she saw Marcus displaying the highest levels of professionalism and compassion, qualities she had failed to show him. The incident was far from over, and as the plane continued its journey to Los Angeles, Sarah knew her career and reputation hung in the balance. The videos taken by passengers would soon go viral, and her discriminatory behavior would be exposed to the world. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to monitor Mr. Wilson, showing no sign that the previous hours of mistreatment had affected his dedication to saving a life. The flight crew had contacted air traffic control, and the pilot announced they would be making an emergency landing in Denver to get Mr. Wilson proper medical attention. As they began their descent, Dr. Marcus Thompson continued monitoring his patient's condition, while Sarah Miller stood in the galley, her world crumbling around her. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. Her supervisor had already sent her a message. The videos of her discriminatory behavior were spreading rapidly across social media platforms. One passenger's tweet had already gained over 50,000 shares. Watch this racist flight attendant discriminate against a black passenger, only to later discover he's a renowned surgeon who saves another passenger's life. #racism, #airline, #discrimination. Meanwhile, other passengers had recognized Dr. Thompson. A medical student in business class excitedly told those around her that she had attended one of his lectures. That's Dr. Marcus Thompson. He pioneered a revolutionary technique for treating brain aneurysms. He's speaking at the International Medical Conference in LA tomorrow. The information spread throughout the cabin, making Sarah's earlier behavior seem even more appalling. Passengers who had witnessed her actions were now openly discussing them, their voices carrying through the cabin. Did you see how she ignored him when he requested service? One passenger whispered. And the way she kept checking his ticket, like he couldn't possibly belong in first class, another added. Michael, The younger flight attendant approached Sarah in the galley. The airline's PR team is asking for an immediate report of the incident, he informed her quietly. They've seen the videos online. Sarah's hands shook as she poured herself a cup of water. The reality of her actions was hitting her hard. Not only had she discriminated against a passenger, but she had done so to someone who was highly respected in his field and had just saved another passenger's life. As the plane descended toward Denver, Mr. Wilson had stabilized enough to speak. "Thank you, Doctor," he said weakly, holding Marcus's hand. "I don't know what would have happened without you here." Marcus smiled warmly. "Just rest now, sir. We'll have you in good hands soon." He turned to Mrs. Wilson, who was wiping tears from her eyes. "Your husband is stable, but he'll need to stay in the hospital for observation. I'll speak with the medical team when we land to ensure they have all the necessary information." Jennifer Chen, the CEO who had confronted Sarah earlier, was now on her laptop, writing a detailed complaint to the airline. Several other passengers were doing the same, their fingers typing furiously on their phones and tablets. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach to Denver International Airport. Emergency medical services are standing by at the gate. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Sarah knew she would have to face the consequences of her actions soon. Her 15-year career flashed before her eyes, all potentially ruined because of her prejudices. She watched as Marcus efficiently prepared Mr. Wilson for transport, giving clear, professional instructions to the flight crew about what would need to be done upon landing. A young girl who had been watching everything unfold turned to her mother and asked loudly, "Mom, why was the flight attendant so mean to the doctor? Is it because his skin is different?" The innocent question echoed through the quiet cabin, making Sarah flinch. As they made their final approach, Marcus remained focused on his patient, showing no sign of satisfaction or revenge toward Sarah. His professionalism and dignity in the face of discrimination made her behavior look even worse by comparison. The plane touched down in Denver, and emergency medical personnel rushed aboard. Marcus gave them a detailed report of Mr. Wilson's condition and the treatment he had administered. The paramedics listened intently, clearly impressed by his expertise and quick thinking. As Mr. Wilson was carefully transferred to a stretcher, Sarah stood in the corner of the cabin, watching the scene unfold. She knew that when the plane door opened, she wouldn't just be facing the consequences of this flight. She would be facing a moment of truth about herself and her prejudices that would change her life forever. After the emergency landing in Denver, the atmosphere on the plane changed dramatically. As medical personnel wheeled Mr. Wilson away, with Dr. Marcus Thompson walking alongside giving final instructions, the remaining passengers pulled out their phones to share what they had witnessed. Sarah Miller sat alone in the galley, her face buried in her hands. The airline's regional manager had just called. She was to report to his office immediately upon landing in Denver. Her hands trembled as she thought about the videos circulating online, showing her discriminatory behavior in high definition. "Sarah," Michael said gently, "they need you at the front desk for a statement." As she walked through the terminal, Sarah could feel eyes following her. Several passengers from the flight were pointing and whispering. The airline's PR nightmare was just beginning, and she was at the center of it. Meanwhile, in the airport medical center, Marcus was ensuring Mr. Wilson received proper care. The emergency room doctor listened attentively as Marcus explained the in-flight treatment he had provided. "Dr. Thompson," the ER doctor said, "I just read your paper on emergency neurological response last month. It's an honor to meet you, though I wish it were under different circumstances." Mrs. Wilson sat nearby, still emotional but relieved. "How can I ever thank you?" she asked Marcus. "If you hadn't been on that flight." "No thanks necessary," Marcus replied warmly. "I'm just glad I could help." Back at the airline's office, Sarah faced a panel of stern-faced executives. The viral videos played on a large screen behind them, showing her repeated acts of discrimination. The contrast between her treatment of Marcus and his subsequent heroic actions had created a perfect storm of bad publicity. "Ms. Miller," the regional manager began, "we've received over 500 complaints in the last 2 hours alone. Can you explain your actions?" Sarah struggled to find words. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "I never meant to." "Never meant to what?" Jennifer Chen interrupted, entering the room. As a frequent flyer and CEO, She had been invited to provide her statement. Never meant to get caught showing your prejudices. The executives looked through a thick file of passenger statements. One particularly damaging account came from a 12-year-old passenger who had written, "The doctor was so nice to everyone, even after the flight attendant was mean to him. He showed us what a real hero looks like." Outside the office, news vans had begun arriving at the airport. The story was spreading. Renowned neurosurgeon saves passenger's life despite facing racial discrimination from flight attendant. Marcus, however, was focused on more important matters. He was on the phone with the conference organizers in Los Angeles, explaining the situation and requesting to deliver his keynote speech virtually if necessary. His priority remained his commitment to sharing life-saving medical knowledge. "Dr. Thompson," a reporter called out as he left the medical center, "do you want to press charges against the airline?" Marcus paused thoughtfully before responding. "This isn't about legal action," he said carefully. "This is about learning and growing as a society. What happened today shows we still have work to do." In the airline's office, Sarah watched this interview on a mounted TV, tears streaming down her face. The dignity and grace with which Marcus handled the situation made her feel even smaller. "Ms. Miller," the HR director said, "we need to discuss the termination of your employment." Jennifer Chen, who had been quiet for a while, suddenly spoke up. "Maybe there's another way," she suggested. "Perhaps this could be a teaching moment, not just for Sarah, but for the entire airline industry." The executives looked at her with interest as she continued. "What if, instead of just firing her, we use this incident to create a comprehensive anti-bias training program?" Sarah's experience could serve as a powerful example of why we need to confront our prejudices. As the discussions continued in the office, Marcus finally had a moment to himself. Sitting in the airport lounge, waiting for information about the continuation of his flight to Los Angeles, he reflected on the day's events. His phone was filled with messages from colleagues, students, and media outlets, but he opened only one, a text from the young medical student who had recognized him on the plane. "Dr. Thompson, today you taught us more than medicine. Thank you." The incident had exploded across social media platforms. #TheThompsonHero and #AirLineracism were trending nationwide, and major news networks had picked up the story. Inside the Denver airport's executive conference room, airline officials were dealing with the biggest PR crisis they had faced in years. Sarah Miller sat in a corner of the room, watching as more videos of her behavior surfaced online. One particularly damaging clip showed her deliberately ignoring Dr. Thompson's requests while cheerfully serving other passengers. The comments beneath the videos were scathing, with many calling for a complete boycott of the airline. Meanwhile, Mr. Wilson had been admitted to the hospital's cardiac unit. Dr. Marcus Thompson visited him before dealing with any media requests. "Your quick action saved my life," Mr. Wilson said, his voice stronger now. "And to think how that flight attendant treated you. I'm so ashamed I didn't speak up when I saw it happening." "Don't worry about that," Marcus replied kindly. "Focus on getting better. I've arranged for one of Denver's top cardiologists to oversee your care." Back in the conference room, Jennifer Chen's suggestion about using the incident for training purposes had gained traction. The airline's diversity officer was already drafting a new comprehensive training program, with Sarah's incident as its central case study. "Ms. Miller," the HR director addressed Sarah, "while your actions were completely unacceptable, we're offering you a choice. You can either accept immediate termination, or you can become part of our new anti-bias initiative, sharing your story and helping others recognize and overcome their prejudices." Sarah, who hadn't stopped crying for hours, looked up. "I never thought of myself as racist," she whispered. "But watching those videos, seeing myself, I don't recognize that person. I want to change. I need to change." The media frenzy continued to grow. Reporters had discovered Dr. Thompson's impressive background, his groundbreaking surgical techniques, his free clinics in underserved communities, his mentorship programs for minority medical students. Each new revelation made Sarah's treatment of him appear even more appalling. Medical organizations began issuing statements. The American Medical Association posted, "Dr. Marcus Thompson's professionalism in the face of discrimination represents the highest ideals of medical service. His actions remind us that excellence knows no color." In the airport's VIP lounge, Marcus finally had time to check his messages. His phone was flooded with support from colleagues, former patients, and students. One message caught his attention. It was from a young black medical student. "Dr. Thompson, watching you handle that situation with such dignity gives me hope. Thank you for showing us how to rise above hatred." The airline had arranged for a private jet to take Marcus to Los Angeles for his conference, but he declined. "I'll take the next commercial flight," he said. "I don't need special treatment. I just want equal treatment." Sarah, having accepted the airline's offer to participate in the anti-bias program, requested a meeting with Dr. Thompson. The airline executives were hesitant, but Marcus agreed to speak with her briefly. When Sarah entered the room where Marcus waited, she could barely meet his eyes. "Dr. Thompson," she began, her voice shaking, "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "You're right," Marcus interrupted gently. "You don't deserve forgiveness yet. Forgiveness is earned through actions, not words. Show me and everyone else that you've learned from this. That would mean more than any apology." The media waited eagerly outside the airport, hoping to catch interviews with either Marcus or Sarah. But Marcus had already moved on to focusing on his upcoming presentation, reviewing his notes on revolutionary surgical procedures that could save countless lives. As evening approached, Mr. Wilson's wife visited Marcus before his departure. "My husband is alive because of you," she said, holding his hand. "And the way you handled everything else. You taught us all something important today." Marcus smiled warmly. "Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most uncomfortable situations," he replied. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a conference full of future doctors waiting to learn about saving lives, and that's what really matters." The day's events had triggered a national conversation about racial bias in customer service, but for Marcus, it was just another day of doing what he had always done, helping others and maintaining his dignity, regardless of how others treated him. 1 week after the incident, the story had evolved from a viral social media moment into a national teaching opportunity. Dr. Marcus Thompson's keynote speech at the Los Angeles Medical Conference, which he had successfully delivered the day after the incident, had taken an unexpected turn. Instead of focusing solely on his groundbreaking surgical techniques, Marcus had incorporated the recent events into his presentation. "Medicine teaches us to look beyond the surface," he told the packed auditorium. "When I see a patient, I don't see color, gender, or social status. I see a human being who needs help." The conference hall had been filled beyond capacity, with many attendees standing along the walls. Medical students, especially those from minority backgrounds, watched in admiration as Marcus shared both his medical expertise and life lessons. Meanwhile, Sarah Miller had begun her journey of transformation. The airline's new anti-bias training program, now named the Thompson Initiative, had her sharing her story with other flight attendants and airline staff across the country. "I thought I wasn't racist because I never used slurs or openly discriminated," Sarah explained to a group of airline employees, her voice trembling. "But watching those videos of myself showed me how deeply buried prejudices can affect our behavior. Dr. Thompson didn't just save Mr. Wilson's life that day, he helped save my humanity by showing me who I really was." Mr. Wilson, now recovering well at home, had become an unexpected advocate for change. His television interview on a major news network had drawn millions of viewers. "I was unconscious during most of the incident," he said. "But when I learned how that flight attendant had treated the very doctor who saved my life, I knew I had to speak up." The airline industry as a whole had taken notice. Major carriers were reviewing their training protocols, and several had already implemented new anti-bias measures. Jennifer Chen's technology company had offered to develop virtual reality training scenarios based on the incident, helping airline staff experience and understand the impact of discriminatory behavior. Back at Atlanta Memorial Hospital, Marcus continued his work as if nothing had changed, though the walls of his office now held hundreds of letters from people inspired by his actions. One letter, from a 10-year-old black boy, simply read, "When I grow up, I want to be like you, not just a doctor, but a good person." Sarah's journey of redemption wasn't easy. Some people criticized the airline for not firing her immediately, while others praised the decision to use her experience as a teaching tool. She had started volunteering at a local community center, working with diverse populations and confronting her biases head-on. One afternoon, she received an unexpected email from Dr. Thompson. "Miss Miller, I've been following your progress with the training program. Change is never easy, but real transformation comes from acknowledging our mistakes and working to be better. Keep going. Dr. Marcus Thompson. The email brought tears to her eyes, not tears of shame this time, but of determination to honor his grace with genuine change. The incident had also sparked changes in airport protocols. New guidelines were implemented across major airports, specifically addressing discriminatory behavior and establishing clear consequences for staff who exhibited bias. Marcus had declined numerous television appearances and book deals, preferring to let his actions speak louder than words. However, he did agree to create a scholarship fund for minority medical students, using the settlement money the airline had offered him, which he had initially refused, but eventually accepted on the condition it would be used for education. Mr. Wilson and his wife had become close friends with Marcus, often visiting him at the hospital. Some people see a crisis as just a problem, Mr. Wilson would tell visitors to his small business. Dr. Thompson saw it as an opportunity to show everyone a better way. As the week drew to a close, Marcus sat in his office, reviewing patient files. A knock on his door revealed Michael, the young flight attendant who had shown kindness during the incident. Dr. Thompson, Michael said, I've been accepted to medical school. Your actions that day showed me what kind of doctor I want to become. Marcus smiled, remembering his own journey and the mentors who had guided him. Remember, he told Michael, our greatest opportunity to change the world comes not when everything is perfect, but when we're faced with challenges that test our character. The incident had transformed from a moment of discrimination into a catalyst for change, proving that sometimes the worst situations can bring out the best in humanity. 1 year after the infamous flight incident, Dr. Marcus Thompson stood at a podium in the airline's corporate headquarters. The audience included executives, flight attendants, and staff from airlines across the country. Among them sat Sarah Miller, no longer in her flight attendant uniform, but wearing a badge that identified her as a diversity training coordinator. Change doesn't happen overnight. Marcus began his speech, but it happens through small actions, one person at a time. The room fell silent, remembering how a single flight had transformed into a movement that reached far beyond the airline industry. The Thompson Initiative had trained over 10,000 airline employees in its first year. Sarah had become its most powerful advocate, traveling across the country to share her story. Her honest acknowledgement of her past prejudices and genuine transformation had helped others confront their own biases. Last week, a young black doctor boarded one of our flights, Sarah shared during the anniversary event. A year ago, I might have questioned his presence in first class. Instead, I remembered Dr. Thompson and saw just another passenger deserving of respect. That's what real change looks like. Mr. Wilson and his wife sat in the front row of the ceremony. His heart condition had improved significantly, and he had become an active supporter of the initiative. Dr. Thompson didn't just save my life, he told the audience. He showed us all how to be better human beings. The medical community had embraced the changes too. Marcus's scholarship fund had already helped 15 minority students enter medical school. Michael, the former flight attendant, was among the first recipients and was excelling in his first year of medical studies. Jennifer Chen's technology company had developed an award-winning virtual reality training program that let people experience both sides of discriminatory behavior. Sometimes, we need to walk in someone else's shoes to understand the impact of our actions, she explained to a reporter. The airline industry had undergone a remarkable transformation. Complaints about discriminatory behavior had dropped significantly across all major carriers. Other industries had begun adopting similar training programs, creating a ripple effect of positive change. Marcus's medical practice continued to thrive. His waiting room now displayed a simple framed message. Character reveals itself not in moments of comfort, but in moments of challenge. Below it hung a photo of him with the crew from that fateful flight, including Sarah, a reminder that transformation was possible. Sarah's journey had been particularly meaningful. She had faced criticism and skepticism, but persevered in her mission to help others learn from her mistakes. Her teenage daughter, who had initially been ashamed of her mother's viral infamy, now proudly shared how her mom had turned a mistake into a mission. The anniversary event concluded with a surprise announcement. The airline revealed a new scholarship program named after both Dr. Thompson and Sarah Miller, the Thompson-Miller Fellowship for Dignity and Change. It would fund education for airline employees seeking to further their careers while promoting diversity and inclusion. A year ago, I was the villain in a viral video, Sarah said, fighting back tears. Today, I'm part of the solution. Dr. Thompson taught me that it's not about where you start, but where you choose to go. Marcus's final words at the ceremony resonated throughout the room. We all have prejudices buried deep within us. The question isn't whether they exist, but what we do when we recognize them. Do we defend them, or do we challenge ourselves to grow? As the event ended, Marcus and Sarah stood together for photographs. Their story had become a powerful symbol of transformation and redemption. News outlets covered the anniversary event, but the most powerful headline came from a small local paper. One flight changed their lives. Now they're changing others. Back in his hospital office that evening, Marcus added a new letter to his collection. It was from Sarah's daughter. Dear Dr. Thompson, thank you for seeing the good in my mom when she couldn't see it in herself. You didn't just change her life, you changed our whole family's future. The story of the racist flight attendant and the distinguished doctor had evolved into something more meaningful than a viral moment of shame. It had become a testament to the power of dignity, forgiveness, and the human capacity for change. As Marcus often said in his speeches, sometimes the worst moments in our lives become the foundation for the best changes in our world.